We have a special guest alert because on today's show, we are bringing on ESPN's Chargers beat writer Kris Rhim, who's going to tell us why the Chargers need to get Justin Herbert some help and the rest of their offseason plan.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. If you want to make sure to never miss big-time interviews like the one we have for you today, make sure to go follow or subscribe for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcasts from. And today, we have ESPN's Kris Rhim, who is a multiple-time recurring guest on the show and always does so well for us. And today, we're going to get into everything throughout the offseason with him. But we also talk about why he doesn't know if the Chargers will go after a big-time wide receiver in free agency. But he does think that they're going to very heavily invest in the interior of the offensive line. Also talks about a Rashawn Slater extension, if Khalil Mack is coming back, and so much more. And here he is, Kris Rhim. All right, guys, the offseason of big guests continues because today we have the one, the only ESPN's Kris Rhim, who has done an excellent job covering the Chargers since he took over a little over a year ago, right? It's only the second offseason that you've fully had with the Chargers because you've been all over the place and were covering the Ravens before that. But you've done such an excellent job, and if you don't already, make sure to go follow him on Twitter because he's one of the best Chargers follows out there, at Kris Rhim1 on Twitter. But Kris, thank you so much for joining us, man. A big-time offseason coming up.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to be here, man. Always a good time.
You've talked about it on ESPN. You've had some great articles on there through ESPN Plus and all the other ESPN articles and the NFL stuff you've been doing on there. But you recently wrote and had to kind of go with 3 words to describe what the Chargers offseason plan was, or kind of the theme of it. And you said, help Justin Herbert, which is pretty, succinctly saying exactly what needs to happen. And I think there's no bigger time right now after watching the Super Bowl, which Patrick Mahomes just went through, and looking at how that game went with Justin Herbert as the Chargers season ended with them just getting totally overwhelmed offensively. But I think the big thing on fans' minds is how they're going to go about doing it. And there's been so much talk with all these receivers, whether it was Tyreek Hill, then it was DK Metcalf, then Devontae Adams wants to come to the West Coast. T. Higgins is out there in the free agent market. So do you think with kind of the philosophies that the Chargers have as far as, building through the trenches and all those things, do you think there still is a chance they take a swing at one of these big name receivers?
Honestly, and this is no reporting based. I don't.
Sure.
I don't. I think that if I obviously covered the Ravens briefly, and Joe Ortiz comes from the Ravens, Chad Alexander comes from the Ravens. If you look at the Ravens, they have never done that. Like, they have never, ever taken a big swing at a receiver, like, ever. It's always through the draft, and they pretty much always missed until Zay Flowers. So it's if I'm looking at that, that tells me is probably not. I mean, obviously things can change, and obviously Joe is his own person. He's not Eric DaCosta. He's not Ozzie, and Chad's his own person, so they could do their own thing. And maybe somebody like a Devontae or someone like that, their agent presents a really, a deal that really helps the Chargers out, right? Like, they're not asking for a lot of money. I think that's a scenario where that happens, but I don't know. So I would say if I was a betting man, I would say I would bet on them not doing. You look at the championship, right? Look at the conference championship game. Usually the 4 teams that are playing is usually like good quarterback, really good trenches. The Chargers have the really good quarterback part. They don't have the other part. So I think that would be the way these guys think, the way they approach the game. I think that's where they're looking. I think you would expect to see a lot of investment in the trenches. And if they can get a receiver, it's going to be lower down the list. But they're going to try. But I wouldn't expect, them throwing some, large numbers at guys like that.
Yeah, I know that a lot of Charger fans definitely don't want to hear that. But, I mean, that's probably a logical way to look at it. But I mean, you talked about it. Another way to help them out is definitely, some better protection. Another way to help Justin Herbert is protecting him a lot better, because as Patrick Mahomes and he found out in the playoffs, you cannot win games if your line is getting wrecked. You also pointed out that each of the Chargers' interior linemen ranked 160th or worse in run block win rate in 2024. Ugh. Do you believe the Chargers will invest premium resources to improve multiple spots on the interior?
I think so. I think it's a possibility, man. I mean, the end of the season news conference, Jim is saying I want everybody back, and Joe's saying the same thing, and as we know, these guys don't always tell the truth at the podium,
Sure.
and I'm not saying them specifically. I'm just saying everyone, right? And because
You're right.
you don't get any advantage from telling, you don't get any advantage from really telling the truth for the most part, right? The smart coaches
No.
know that. And that's not saying lying, but and I'm not saying he's lying about this, but he knows it's basically not possible for you to ever get back an entire roster the same, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you watch that game, I think Justin, I think one of the things about that game is that the line has been the line all season, right? And I think throughout the whole season, Justin is, great, and he's overcome that, right? So, and on this day, he couldn't do it. But I think it heightened what had already been an issue, right? Like it really heightened what had already been an
Yeah.
issue, and on the biggest stage, and they know that. So I definitely believe they're going to, invest in, premium resources into that, right? Like they went into a draft with the number 5 pick and drafted a guy who played left tackle at 5 when they had no receiver who had 1,000 yards in their career on the roster. So I think that should tell you that they're probably going to do that.
Yeah, it feels that way. I mean, that's, they told us that, and we still kind of talked ourselves last year into the Malik Neighbors of the world, or
Right.
maybe it's Marvin Harrison, and then it was just like last second, it's like, no, it's JC Latham. It's potentially Joe
Yeah.
Allen. It's like, no way, right? But it's like, no, they did exactly kind of what they said they would do. They told us they were going to be an offensive line team. And then even when we doubted them, they're like, we pretty much told you all along. It's going to be an
Right.
offensive lineman at 5. You guys just kind of decided not to listen. But the Chargers offensive line, with all the issues they have on the interior, I think part of the thing that happened in that playoff game was you had both of your tackles kind of had their worst games of the season too. And
Yep.
then you add that on to what had been already a constant problem in the interior, and it looked the way that it did. But we haven't seen yet how this new regime is going to handle paying their own star players, and Rashawn Slater is going into the last year of his contract. So do you think that there's any momentum currently for them to get a deal done before this season starts? Does it feel like there's any urgency there? Because it feels like a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal, and it almost is. It's just kind of quiet. It's like unusual.
Yeah.
There's not. Joe and Joe Ortiz and Rashawn have both said, we want to get a deal done. Obviously, Jim said the same thing. But it's not like the excitement in which he talks about like re-signing Khalil Mack, for example. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was so. It's just. I'm not that I'm saying that they're not interested, right? It was just kind of strange in the way he. I think it's kind of maybe they're. It's something that they expect. Like with Rashawn, they're like, that's
Okay.
not
Yeah.
something I really need to think much about. Versus like Khalil could actually leave.
Right.
So I think there's not like a urgency because they feel like we got this. Like this guy wants to be here. We want him here. We just got to figure it out at some point, right? So Rashawn, I'm not. That's not a situation I'll be worried about.
Yeah.
If I was a Chargers fan.
Good.
That's good to hear. And I think it's just because it's like, hey, obviously the Chargers know who they have with Rashawn. Rashawn is a clear beast and one of the best tackles in the league. It's not a question of if we sign him, it's when we sign him and to how much money he is going to get when they inevitably do that deal. But J.K. Dobbins was really good for most of the season, when he was on the field. Gus Edwards, however, was not. He only showed a couple of flashes of his former self. How do you kind of see the Chargers going about shaping the running back room next season?
Yeah, that's a good question, man, because it's such an important room for this staff and for the mentality that this team wants to play with. Wouldn't be surprised to see it completely different. I also wouldn't be surprised to see if they draft another guy. I do think that J.K. has proven, that even though he did miss a few games on injured reserve, I think he's proven that he still has it, that he could play. I think it would make sense to bring him back. He wants to be back. Again, guys say they want to be back, and then somebody pays them more money, and they're not back.
Sure.
But he definitely, one of the things JK always talks about is like not wanting to be like a player who bounces around a bunch of different teams and like wanting to build. He has talked about like wanting to build something in LA. Like he likes the idea of being a part of like something from the ground up. So I think that says that he might be willing to come back. And yeah, with Gus, it was definitely, I think, a year that he didn't want to have. I think, I think some different times with Gus, I felt like if he had gotten more opportunities in specific situations where he was rolling, I think his numbers would be different. Not that I'm not trying to excuse the way he looked. I think overall it was definitely
Yeah.
not what people expected. But I think there's a better version of Gus that if he's still with the Chargers next year, I think people might be able to see. So to answer your question, I think they're definitely gonna upgrade the room though. But if I was
Yeah.
guessing, which I am, I would say J.K. probably, and then another person in there.
We have more great stuff with Kris Rhim, including his thoughts on Khalil Mack potentially coming back and why he thinks Joey Bosa could potentially be back, and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel, because when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And now that football season is over, it's time to go full steam ahead on basketball, especially when you have teams like the Lakers doing what they're doing, trading for Luka Doncic. I know I'm going to be looking at the Lakers -7.5 going up against the Jazz, who they absolutely just blew out the other day. I think they're going to do it again. And with FanDuel, there's so many different options. You can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet just on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. Love a parlay. Love cooking up parlays with the boys. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed a chance with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Well, it feels like it, I mean, at least from what's coming out, it seems like a very strong draft class. So it might be something where they dip back into it again this year, even after taking Kamani Vidal last year. But I think that's the hard part, right? Is just like the running game wasn't great all year. But when J.K. Dobbins left for that 4-game stretch, it sunk to a different level, right? They only surpassed 100 rushing yards in one of those 4 games. Neither one of either Gus Edwards or Kamani Vidal had, 3+ games of averaging over 4 yards a carry. So like that's just kind of what it was. But as much as you hope those guys can be better in 2025, you didn't get to actually see it, right? Like I just don't know how you can have a ton of confidence like, hey, Kamani Vidal is going to make this leap, or Gus Edwards is going to go back to looking like what he did in Baltimore, because we just didn't see it last year, which makes it seem okay, hey, that is a room that has to be addressed. And if you lose J.K. Dobbins, then you have 2 kind of players you're uncertain about right now. But one of the things that just kind of lingers over this offseason is the Khalil Mack situation, because Joey Bosa, it's an untenable contract cap hit. It just feels like it's almost impossible for them to bring back Bosa for what he's going to make next year. So I think we've kind of written that off. But that becomes a lot scarier when you're talking about Khalil Mack, who we heard the great news that he's not retiring. That's step 1, right? Step 2 is now recruiting him to come back. And if he is going to come back on a kind of yearly mercenary way at this point, you have to kind of convince him that you're the best place, right? Because he hasn't won a playoff game in his career. And I think the Chargers did a good job of, selling him on their vision last year to get him to take that pay cut. But if he doesn't come back, man, like how high does that boost the need at edge when you kind of feel like Joey Bosa is not coming back? If Khalil Mack leaves, it feels like that's now in bright letters at the top of the list of things they have to address.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, if Khalil doesn't come back, I mean, yeah, for sure. You start talking about, I think people will be, tweeting me about Myles Garrett probably and people like that. I mean, I think Thule is a good player. I think Bud is also a good player. But yeah, it's not, it's you need more, right? Like you definitely want more in your edge group. You definitely want more. So I think that definitely becomes a pressing need. I also don't think that with Joey, I do think there's a situation where he comes back on a reduce, because at least the way he talks again. Yeah. It doesn't sound like he wants to move his family, or it doesn't sound like he wants to leave. So again, he took that pay cut. He's talked about wanting to be a Charger for life. If there's interest from the Chargers, I think he's a guy. And man, the one thing about that playoff game that kind of went under the radar, similarly to the Jaguars game when Asante had like 3 picks in the first half that just is gone.
Yeah.
Is that Joey and Khalil were really good. Like Joey had 6 pressures
Yeah.
and I think a sack, and Khalil had 5 and 2 sacks. It's like,
Yeah.
obviously we haven't seen them in too many big games, but to me, in my mind, what I was thinking when I was watching the defense, until things got started unraveling, is like,
Right.
these guys are playing up, right? Like this is a big game, like the way that
they're stepping up in the moment.
yeah, they're stepping up. Are these guys like big game hunter kind of players? Like it made me want to see them more in like these kind of moments. But yeah, edge is definitely a concern if Khalil and Joey are out of the picture, and definitely moves up to like a major need for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, one of the moves that the Chargers and Joe Ortiz made that was kind of, one of the last minute things was getting Elijah Molden and being able to trade for him, which was great. And, you obviously talked about it in one of your articles that, re-signing safety Elijah Molden is, something that the Chargers absolutely should be doing. And me and Dan definitely couldn't agree more. I mean, a 7th round pick from 2026 to be able to get that type of production, and it definitely paid gigantic dividends. How important do you think it is for Jesse Minter's defense to bring back that versatile safety?
I mean, yeah, like we look, Elijah is a big part of the version of Derwin that we saw this year, like a really big part, right? Derwin was a nickel, like he just played nickel, and he was great. He was amazing. He
pro.
got back to
All
being
pro.
all pro, right? So I think, there's not much more you have to say, right? and Elijah played well back there, right? He had I forget the number of picks he finished with, but he
He had 3,
like,
but for a while he was leading the team until Tarheeb still caught up to him. Yeah.
But Elijah should have had like 6. He had a few. I think he might have had 2 called back, and then 1
back-to-back games they had 1 called back. I remember that. You're right.
So he was a ball hunter. He was comfortable back there. He was one of the many guys on his defense that took a 1-year deal. That when they called it a prove it deal, he proved it. Like he really proved that he could play. So I think Elijah, like I said, he's a big importance and someone that's not getting talked about enough.
I agree.
I just like the fact that you're able to push Derwin closer to the line of scrimmage and let him attack and get downhill because you have somebody on the back end that you trust that can be that last line of defender, which the Chargers tried multiple different guys to find that right dance partner, and they might finally found him.
Well, I think the thing is, too, is like you have Derwin James, who you feel great about, but he plays best near the line of scrimmage. So who does that leave you with on the back end? You have Alohi Gilman, obviously, who was a little banged up this year, but like that's it. Like I think there's definitely an argument for take a young safety, but also bring back Elijah Molden. But they need to get also some youth in that room. You can't keep running it back with 1-year deal. So hopefully they can get a kind of a multi-year thing done with Elijah Molden. I don't know if the interest will be so much that he becomes unaffordable after the season that he just had, especially coming off of injury. But man, he feels like, hey, if you can lock that up to a couple-year extension, it's going to do dividends for the back end of your defense. And I think a guy they desperately missed later on in the season after he got hurt, and the toughness that he had, where I'm pretty sure he was out there probably playing a handful of snaps with a fully, broken leg. No, not fully broken leg, but like he didn't look right, and he went back out there and tried to play, and it's like, oh, actually, I can't play because my leg's broken. It's like, oh, okay. Well, hey, thank you for trying, because that was pretty nuts that happened. But we talk a lot about the Chargers, offense and what they don't have, but maybe what we're not talking about enough is what they do have, and that's a young star in Ladd McConkey, who arguably just had the best rookie season in franchise history and put the cherry on top with one of the most impressive rookie performances we've ever seen in a playoff game. He doesn't have the prototypical wide receiver 1 size, right? But he still put up wide receiver 1 numbers, right? Over 1,100 yards, most in franchise history, most receptions in franchise history, and did it in as many games as Keenan Allen did it in his rookie season. But he doesn't look like that guy, right? So, like, what do you think the ceiling is for Ladd McConkey? Because we know that he put up those kind of numbers, but I don't think people see him and think, hey, this is the long-term wide receiver 1 for the Chargers.
I mean,
we have more to get into with Kris Rhim, including why he thinks Ladd McConkey absolutely is a wide receiver 1, and much more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys that, yes, football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports, because with Prize Picks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. This week, I'm looking at the Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards, who more than or less than 31.5 points tonight against the Milwaukee Bucks. I definitely think he could do it. The best part, though, Prize Picks, quick and easy. You can set up your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast and secure withdrawals mean I get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you can get discounted player projections for even better value. But you always want to check out the promos tab because they always have so much great stuff going on there. And since you listen to this show, we have a special offer for you. Download the app today, and you can use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you place your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. You don't even need to win to get the $50 bonus. Prize Picks, run your game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why. Yeah, I mean, I think I think that you should. I mean, it's
Yeah.
you look at guys like you look at an Amon Ra, St. Brown kind of guy in Detroit. You look at like I mean, I've talked about Zay Flowers and how I see him like Zay Flowers all the time.
I always saw a little bit of Antonio Brown too, a little bit. I know that's a weird one, but to me, they have a little bit of the same kind of movement and ways they get open.
Yeah, Antonio Brown for sure. I think Antonio was probably better outside. He was probably a little bit better than outside, but Antonio's there. It's a different kind of game now. Like you don't need obviously you would like to have like a big X guy out there, and the Chargers will get that, but you can win, you could dominate. Like Ladd can dominate, right? Like he's physical. We've seen it. That was Derek Stingley out there. That was like this is one of the best, fastest secondaries in the league. He got 197. He got 197 when the thing is, this is who we just need to stop. Like if we stop him,
they only had one real threat going up against him, and he still put that on him anyways.
And he put up 200 yards. So I think I mean, this is kind of going off too, but like, I mean, you just look at the draft that they had, right? Like the draft that they had, man, like it's just, you're not supposed to like hit, the way they just hit in this draft. And Ladd is among the top of that. So I think I'm what I've seen from Ladd this year was like, above what I expected. I think above what many people expected. And I think he's a franchise. Another thing about Ladd is he is like the wide receiver version of Justin in terms of like personality. Like
it does seem like that.
Yeah, like when you ask him a question, like he's talking about everyone else but himself, or like it's like pulling teeth to ask him about himself. He's like super selfless, super just focused on ball. And I think that matters, right? Like you get along with Justin. They think the same, they act the same. Like this is a connection that's going to be, if they're here for the next decade,
Absolutely. And I think that when you saw that the most was early in the season, that first Kansas City game, right? You have Ladd McConkey running a back line to the end zone. And all of a sudden, when kind of everything breaks down, he just stops, cuts back. Justin Herbert throws it behind the DB that's following him, who was in as perfect of coverage as you could possibly have. And there it's right into Ladd McConkey's hand sitting there in the back of the end zone. Like those guys' chemistry and what they were able to do in year one, especially after seeing, what it can look like for a first round receiver. And he was a second round pick, I know. But like we saw the struggles that Quentin Johnson and Justin Herbert had getting on the same page as a rookie. And that took a huge leap in year two. Ladd McConkey and him, it was just instant, man. And like we saw it during training camp a little bit, but like to touch on what you talked about with Joe Ortiz, how much faith do you think that should give Chargers fans that he was able to get 4 immediate starting players out of that draft? Because I think year one, they get the benefit of the doubt, right? Nobody is going to be too hard on the Chargers as a whole. I think how well they played raised the expectations. So when they lost the way they did, we forgot that a month before, we never thought they could win a playoff game with the roster that they had, right? And I think those expectations could probably hurt them in that final game. But like, you want to make another leap going into year two, and the expectations are going to be a little bit higher for Joe Ortiz, for Jim Harbaugh, now that it's not them taking over what was a total shipwreck, a 5-win season the year before. But how much faith should that give Chargers fans that you're looking at a general manager who, with compensatory picks, should probably have 10 picks in the draft, and just came up with 4 players that contributed immediately at least, 2 or 3 above average starters in their first year, now trying to do that again going into 2025.
Yeah, I think a lot of confidence, man. Like a lot of confidence, a lot of trust in what they're doing. Like this. I don't think there were many people that expected that. I didn't expect the Chargers to win 11 games.
No.
And people talk about the opponents they played and stuff like that. I think 11 games is 11 games. And yeah, they swept a divisional opponent that was in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I think that's very hard to do. And yeah, they just the first year one, the way that it just is not supposed to go like that. Like the way that they had, from Puna to like Elijah to Cam to everybody getting hurt,
Yeah.
and still the train kept moving. So yeah, I think they should just. I think I might have been on another show recently, and somebody asked me something similar, and I kind of just said like, I think whatever Joe does, you should trust until.
Which is crazy because he's only had one draft, man. He did that in
Literally.
his first ever draft, which is
Literally.
crazy.
Well,
Yeah.
with less than half the time to prepare to do that too, and that's
Yes.
what he
And scouts
was
that were
able to
already on the
provide.
Chargers
Just
staff, like, wasn't
imagine.
his full group. Yeah,
And they
crazy.
were
Yeah,
what,
just-
50 million in the hole when he got here.
Yeah.
With
Yeah,
albatross
so-
aging contracts too, man,
Yes.
and they worked around it. And I think FanDuel's over under on their season was 8.5 wins. And I
Yes.
think that's what made it so much more disappointing. Obviously, David, when the Breaks got beat off him in the end.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously the Chargers season ended in the worst possible way, and the players and the fans, we have to sit with that result,
that's the
for
worst part.
the entire offseason, which that sucks. Obviously, they did a lot better than anybody really thought that they were going to, and it certainly seems like Jim Harbaugh and company have reshaped the culture. But do you think the 2024 season showed that the organization is heading in the right direction?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely showed that it's heading in the right direction. I mean, from the way that they were winning games, the way that they were finishing games, I think another sign of I guess the culture. Everyone talks about the culture being built and the culture this and the culture that, but there's like a real belief in there, in the guy leading the team. That was there, even before, when Jim was hired because of what he did. But as the season went on, just little things like players start to talk like him and use his phrases and do things like that. And I think when everybody's on the same page, that's how I think a team that maybe on paper doesn't look like it should do certain things does certain things. Like you can sign a guy like a Marcus May and he can get an interception, in Atlanta.
His
You can
first
do those
game,
types
yeah.
of things. So yeah, I think it's a sign that the Chargers are headed in the right direction for sure. I think what I think about now is like, they set a really high standard, like you said, right? Like 11 wins. Pete Carroll's in your division now. The league is, you're in the AFC. I think the expectation is going up, right? Like the standard has been set, right? Like which is a lot of pressure for them going into this next season. And yeah, I think people are going to have high expectations for the Chargers, man, because of what they did this year. And sometimes that's like it's a blessing and it's like a curse, right? Because say they win, say they go 9-8 next year, right? Like I don't think people would be happy about that.
No.
Not at
Yeah,
all.
like yeah, but if they
I think you're expected to be better, and it's going to be really hard with the schedule that they have to be better than 11 wins because obviously you play who's on your schedule, but I believe last time I checked it was 9 or more playoff teams that they have on their schedule next season, and it always looks different when you're looking at it before the season. There are plenty of games we thought were going to be tough games for the Chargers this season, and those teams by the time they got to them weren't as good as everyone thought they were going into the season.
Right.
So there's a lot of that. But I think now it's, hey, that's nice. They did stuff they didn't do before. They beat the teams they were supposed to beat. They weren't blowing huge leads in the fourth quarter. Like there was major progress there. But now that you've done all that, that itself isn't going to be enough in 2025. It's not going to be just beating the bad teams. You're going to have to beat the good teams, right? You're going to have to start winning some of these close games you're having against these playoff teams, which you didn't last year against the Steelers or the Chiefs or the Ravens or the Buccaneers. that feels like it has to be the next step where you have to start winning some of these big games, and you should have a better roster to get it done. So, Kris, thank you so much for giving us your time today. We really appreciate you coming on, man, and we can't wait to keep talking to you as the offseason continues, because as you've put it on ESPN and all the great articles that you've done on there, and make sure you're checking them out on ESPN. If you have ESPN Plus, you can get some really, really good, juicy content on ESPN as this Chargers offseason keeps going. But thank you so much, man, for your time. We can't wait to have you back.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate y'all. Sorry about
another special thanks to Kris Rhim as the offseason of guests continues, and me and David Drogemeyer, the guest booker extraordinaire, are going to continue to keep trying to bring you guys the best guests for the entire offseason. So thank you guys so much for checking out today's show. To make sure you don't miss any shows, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. And you're going to want to do that because in the next 2 days, we're going to be talking about every impending upcoming free agent for the Chargers and whether the Chargers should keep them or whether they should let them go as we play stay or go with the Chargers' upcoming decisions they have to make. So make sure you guys are back here for that. You can also find the show every day on our social media, on Twitter at LockedOnLAC, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also find the show every day on my Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David's at Dro Talk SD. But so fun to do these interviews, and we're going to continue to be the only daily Chargers podcast out there. So we'll talk to you guys tomorrow as we get into stay or go with some big decisions the Chargers have to make. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.